Here is a funny story from our good captain, which unfortunately I could not get on audio recording, but I'll do my best to relate the story to you. It involves the captain, and that one time he had lunch with an admiral. Here on Down Periscope, Up Periscope, Tales of Submarine Tours. Submarines are known to have excellent food, at least as far as the US military is concerned. Selected cooks on submarines go through additional training at Culinary school to enhance their skills, and by the time they're finished with that training, they're pretty much chefs. Now, as they say, RHIP, rank has its privileges. While officers on submarines do eat the same thing as enlisted, the difference is in the presentation. And this is especially true when a flag officer comes aboard. Living in opulence and luxury within their ivory towers, the officers with the stars only have vague inklings of what the little people have to endure. Well, let's talk about the menu. The captain told me that when his submarine was about to be commissioned, they invited an admiral to lunch. Or maybe it was dinner, I don't really remember. Anyway, so they invited the admiral over for a meal to commemorate the event. The menu was devised by the cooks, and it consisted of steamed clams for an appetizer and flounder rolls for the main course. Yeah, I'm getting pretty hungry already. Now, truth be told, most meals with officers, even flag rank officers, are more formal than sitting down for a meal at Denny's or something, but you're not having a full course meal like we're on the first class on the Titanic or something. Then again, I can't say I've had lunch with too many admirals, so experiences may vary. Now, as for the captain, everything was going well, and the arrangements for the meal were all set. So the admiral arrives, and the meal began. As the steamed clams were being passed around, all the officers were taking big helpings of these things. Then the bowl of clams arrives at the admiral, and he doesn't take any. He just passes the bowl along. The captain briefly noticed this, but didn't think too much of it. Anyway, they got to the main course, and the captain noticed that the admiral is being pretty finicky with his food. He was sort of picking around it with his fork and only eating whatever was inside the flounder rolls. It was spinach or something. The captain noticed this the entire meal, and the admiral was being very polite, not saying anything about it. The captain said there wasn't anything wrong with the food. It was delicious. Of course, some of you can probably see where this is going. So the meal ended, and the admiral went home. The captain was still a bit confused, so he called up the admiral's chief of staff and asked if anything was wrong with the meal. The chief of staff then mentioned that, well, the admiral doesn't like seafood. Now, additionally, this admiral was from Texas, so he likes barbecue. Obviously, this was not Admiral Rickover, as he was from what would be modern-day Poland. Anyway, it turns out that the problem was that they never asked if the admiral had any dietary needs or preferences. Or maybe the admiral forgot to bring along his staff and the all-important food taster. I mean, we wouldn't want to poison the admiral, would we? Anyway, nobody got in any apparent trouble for this, but that's what happened. The funny thing is that this admiral was eventually transferred to Subland, that is, Submarine Force Atlantic, and then to SubPac, Submarine Force Pacific. Now, I don't think this admiral was the ComSubland, that is the Commander Submarine Force Atlantic or ComSubPac for the Pacific, since there's only been one, who I think was Vice Admiral Elton W. Joe Grenfell, who was in those positions in the 1960s, at least to my knowledge, and he was born in Massachusetts, so this event must have occurred after his tenure. Now, here's where the story gets really ironic. One year, they're doing a rim pack, that is a Pacific Rim naval exercise with various naval forces from other countries around the Pacific. During this rim pack, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces were participating, and the Japanese officers ended up taking this admiral out to a sushi dinner. Yeah, I bet he really enjoyed that one, being that he doesn't eat seafood and all that. Now, as a side note, in case you're wondering, sushi is actually an entire cuisine consisting of a variety of foods, some of it cooked, some of it raw. So when you think of like the thinly sliced raw fish, in reality, you're thinking of specifically sashimi. Anyway, it's still kind of funny, considering that a good chunk of the world's population gets their primary source of protein from seafood, not just the Japanese. Now, understandably, though, I mean, some people just don't like fish or seafood, whether it's cooked or uncooked, because the flavor or texture or whatever, it's unappealing to them. Moving forward to today, it kind of raised the question, well, would submarines today, would there be sushi on the menu? And I asked the captain if menus on submarines today ever had any sushi. Since Japanese food has become much more accepted and popular in the last 20 or so years, would submarine cooks today ever serve sushi for lunch or something on a submarine? His response was that they very well might, but it would probably be something more palatable to Americans, like California roll or something fried like shrimp tempura or something. Probably not sashimi. But who knows? I don't know. Maybe there's a modern submarine CS, a culinary specialist out there who could chime in. Maybe have you ever served sushi or Japanese food on a submarine? I mean, sushi definitely would not be on the menu before then. Even up until like the 1980s and probably 1990s. I mean, East Asian cultures, such as Japan, were viewed as really exotic and mysterious and all that. You know, sort of Orientalism mindset was still prevalent. Japanese food was generally seen as like gross or odd or exotic by Westerners. You know, like, oh, those Japanese people are so barbaric. They eat raw fish. That's what I call bait. They need to cook their food properly. That kind of thinking, you know what I mean? So it's only taken about maybe 20 or so years for these foods to become more mainstream, right? But you know, back in the 80s, like, oh my God, you're eating sushi? That's like raw fish, isn't it? So, but I mean, nowadays, you know, sushi places are all over the place. But of course, this raises the further question of, is submarine food really that good? There's a lot to be said about the quality of food served on submarines, or at least the taste of it. Submarines are known for having the best food in the entire US military, not just the Navy, mind you. According to the US Navy submariners I've talked to, the accuracy of that statement is generally on point, but I've heard both good and bad, but mostly good things about submarine food. I mean, God help the cook if the food is bad on submarines because there's no place to hide on one. However, never having personally tasted any food that came out of a submarine galley, I cannot speak with any authority regarding the quality of it. In my experience, the food I've had out of galleys isn't atrocious, but it's not 5-star quality either. You can eat it, but it's occasionally hit or miss. I mean, some of it is really good, and some of it is not so good. Most of the time, I'd say the food I've had out of galleys is just average. I mean, it beats fast food any day of the week. In reality, the quality of food aboard ships, submarines, or even ashore depends on many factors, starting with probably the skill of the cooks. Submarine cooks initially go to 5 weeks of culinary training, A school, in the Navy, and then, from my understanding, selected ones are sent for another 5 months at the Culinary Institute of America, the CIA. No, not that CIA, the other CIA. So by the time they're done with that, they're pretty much chefs. After they leave the Navy, many of them go on to cook in fancy hotels, restaurants, and even the White House, which usually has at least one former submarine cook, or so I've been told. Now, how discriminating your personal tastes are is probably a major factor. If you grew up with like lots of gourmet Michelin-starred food, then you probably won't find a submarine meal to be the most Epicurean thing you've ever tasted. Secondly, what your favorite foods are no doubt influences how well you enjoy the menu. Thirdly, when you're tired and hungry, just about anything tastes good. Lastly is time underway. The absence of any fresh ingredients after the first couple weeks at sea would probably have some bearing on the quality, since any ingredients after that would come frozen, dehydrated, powdered, or probably out of a can. At that point, you'd be hard-pressed to refer to the food as quote-unquote fresh. I mean, there's only so much you can do with canned, dried, or frozen ingredients. As one tour guide and former sub-sailor put it, quote, a lot of different food comes out of these cans. Some of it good, some of it not so good, end quote. On USS Blueback, most of the tour guides who are former sub sailors say that the food is usually pretty good, but there have been instances of botched meals. For example, one tour guide related to me how one time a cook accidentally used salt instead of sugar when making the pancakes. Yeah, nobody was happy with that breakfast. There's another instance where another tour guide said one meal they had powdered cottage cheese, which had been rehydrated. The crew took one bite of that stuff and promptly spat it back out. Yeah, it sounds pretty bad already. Powdered cottage cheese. Huh. Yeah, that doesn't sound appealing just listening to it. In terms of beverages, another thing would be the quote-unquote mechanical cow. That is, the milk machine. You would have fresh milk for roughly a week, but after that, it's powdered milk, which, if you've ever had, tastes sort of like chalk. Otherwise, they'll just put iced tea or lemonade in the machine. However, I've heard that submarines today may be using a kind of shelf-stable milk or something along those lines, which can last for months at room temperature and reportedly actually tastes like milk, so I've been told. Another sea service favorite, or maybe unfavorite, is bug juice, which is essentially an industrial-strength Kool-Aid or Gatorade. This stuff is a solution of water, food coloring, vitamins, minerals, and lots of sugar. The color, whether it be red, orange, yellow, green, purple, or even blue, has no effect on the flavor because it all just has a funky, sugary, sweet taste to it. Submariners drink it so as not to get scurvy, and they need vitamin D due to lack of sunlight. Another volunteer tour guide who served on USS Memphis, SSN 691, actually told me that the bug juice machine on that boat was a slushy machine to make it more appealing for sailors to drink. And apparently it worked because more guys were drinking it. In reality, it was bug juice. It merely changed the texture, not the flavor, but it was a slushy machine. Yeah, that's military psychology for you, right? Coffee would also be available 24/7 since the US military pretty much runs on coffee. One justification I've heard regarding the availability of coffee is that modern nuclear submarines keep the oxygen level in their atmosphere at around 18%, which is slightly lower than at sea level that you would breathe, which is normally 21% oxygen. Now, the purpose is to reduce the risk of fire on board a submarine. However, this lower oxygen level subsequently makes you more drowsy, so therefore coffee is always available since the caffeine helps keep you awake and alert. US submarines also have the added bonus of having soft serve ice cream available 24/7, but the only flavor is vanilla. However, there would be toppings available, such as like chocolate or caramel syrup, sprinkles, nuts, maraschino cherries, etc. That said, I've been told that you would not be allowed to have any ice cream unless you were qualified on that submarine and had your dolphins. Now, the qualification process on a submarine essentially means learning all of the systems on the boat and getting signed off on a qual sheet. On modern submarines, it takes around 1 year to do. So, the joys of eating ice cream nonstop are reserved for qualified crew members. Therefore, if you want ice cream, then you better work harder and get qualified. The exception might be that you're doing a really good job on your qualifications thus far, and somebody can vouch for you, allowing you to have some ice cream. But they better be present when you're eating it. It all reinforces the cold military logic that these nice things would not be allowed unless they had some kind of ulterior motive, such as making you work harder or longer. As some final thoughts, the captain also mentioned how he once asked for anchovies on his pizza, but they didn't have them on the submarine because apparently they were an imported item. So the cooks substituted sardines instead, or some kind of small fish. The captain also mentioned that peanut butter goes well on pizza. Okay. Well, whatever you say, Captain. I won't judge. That does seem a little strange to me, but whatever. Anyway, so we could easily discuss submarine cuisine for hours or days. In fact, there are entire recipe books devoted on how submarine food and Navy food has evolved over time. You can find them online, actually. Maybe Max Miller of Tasting History will do a YouTube video on submarine food one day. I mean, he's already done a couple videos on like Navy and military foods. Now, as for me, I will say I'm searching for an original recipe for curry in the Imperial Japanese Navy. But all in good time. Well, folks, that was a little story about the captain, submarine food, and that one time he had lunch with an admiral who did not eat seafood. Anyway, take care.